Welcome to New Detroit's Town Hall. I'm Marshall Favors, Director of Community Engagement for New Detroit. New Detroit is a coalition of leaders working to achieve racial understanding and racial equity in metropolitan Detroit. I am so excited to share that our organization will have our Just Lead Advancing Racial Equity Conference on October 13th and the 14th at the Detroit Marriott, and tickets are available now at newdetroit.org. Well, during this town hall, we've brought together a diverse group of New Detroit leaders in a virtual conversation that models how everyday people can have conversation with friends, families, coworkers, and peers about difficult conversations like replacement theory. So to get us started and to give us some context about replacement theory, I'm going to introduce Dr. Truman Hudson Jr., and he will introduce our guests who will engage in this roundtable dialogue. Dr. Truman Hudson Jr. is the Outreach Coordinator, Instructor of Multiculturalism for Wayne State University College of Education. Welcome, Dr. Hudson.
Thank you very much, Marshall, and thank you to New Detroit. And also thank you to my colleagues who are on this call participating, Michael Sosin, Eric Thomas, and my good friend, Dwan Dandridge, and my new friend, Denise Brooke Williams. We're about to have a great dialogue, tapping into some tough topics. And I also left out my other friend, Rebecca Irby from New Detroit. So thank you all for participating. This is not going to be a moderated discussion. This is going to be kind of like a kitchen conversation. So we're all in the kitchen and we're sipping on our coffee, and we're about to take a deep dive into this discussion around the replacement theory. So to frame the replacement theory, it's kind of like a framework that came to the forefront of our public square this past May, when a white male, 18 years old, killed 18 Blacks and injured 3 other Blacks in a supermarket in Buffalo, New York. And in the public square, we actually witnessed this on a live stream. And he left a screed that was pretty much framed from a white supremacist framework that he felt like there was a need to get rid of people of color, primarily Blacks, because whites did not want to be replaced in this country. The Great Replacement Theory goes back to the early 1900s and is framed from a Western European disposition where whites in Western countries feel as if though if immigration policies are put in place where people of color are put in a position where they can potentially become the majority, that the culture of whiteness and the power of whiteness will be no longer. In our background conversation prior to this discussion, we talked about prior to May, this has been a part of the American culture way before Charlottesville, way before anything that we're looking at. When you think about the fact that the natives who are indigenous to this land, their culture was actually replaced. And we've been fighting against the replacement of white identity since over 404 years. We have a real difficult issue to deal with in America around race. 41% of the respondents to a recent Gallup poll stated that race is a key concern. And I guess when we think about the replacement theory and what occurred for 400 plus years, I'm just going to throw this out to our colleagues. Why is race and the replacement theory such a tough topic to dive into in the public space? Anybody can answer that one.
I'll jump in, right? I think you have a lot going on. I'm glad to be here with colleagues. I love engaging in these type of conversations and hearing what's going on in the minds of some of the other folks out here that are committed to doing the heavy lifting and the hard work. But I think, you know, as I think about this, we have like always had rhetoric from folks that are coming from a posture of hate, right? And I think that we're always trying to figure out who's going to be able to recruit the folks that sit in the middle. And Eric said something, like started to say something before we jumped on, and we tried to bottle him until we started the conversation, right, together. But like you have a fear that I don't know if we're even open to allowing like white people, and I think more specifically white men, to have and express publicly, right? As we have people talking about white people no longer being the majority 30, 40 years out from now, right? I think that when we say that, there's something that's implied there, right? Like, hey, like your time is running out. You know what I mean? So, and I mean, if you have that conversation happening at the same time as we're trying to push for diversity for the right reasons, and people are hearing, you just want to replace me, right? So I think that there's space in the middle where we have white folk that could be allies, could be friends, that have fears that they're probably too scared to express to us because we're going to take it a certain way, and think that they align with the folks that are coming from the position of hatred, right? So I think that we have to figure out how to make room for people to express fears, and have real dialogue, and wrestle with, like, do I care that you're afraid, right? Like, we've all been living in concern and fear, as people of color, like we're born into that, right? So seeing that expressed from like our white colleagues and white neighbors, like I'll talk personally, right? Like I have to get myself to where, like, Dewan, can you make yourself care that there's a genuine fear that's happening there, so that you can be open to, like, yeah, even going as far as having some empathy, right? And validating that and having a conversation, because if the fear is there, then it's at least real to them in their minds. Can we have that conversation? And that's where I try to find myself, and the questions I'm asked myself and I wrestle with.
Mm. So so you bring up a significant point in regards to the closeness of the fear, because based on the census data, whites will become the minority or become a minority group in America in 2045. So that's 23 years from now. So that's closer than what most of us think. So what makes that a difficult conversation for us to? I hear you saying that there's this backdrop of white men not having a space to talk. But what else makes this a difficult conversation for us to have, knowing that things are starting to shift, and we have this pushback from the 1619 Project and the need for lifting up more diverse cultural perspectives through a critical race lens inside of education. We have all of these things in the background saying, we want to come to the table and we want to participate in the public square, but then there's this other dialogue that's saying, no, 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 let's hold on to what we had, because what we had matters.
Yeah, I would jump in and just say, I wonder if some of it is we don't know what the new construct is, right? So when you think about the idea that really everything we know, whether you're of the diverse background or the majority background, is our current state, right? So whatever the policies, the structure, how we do things. And so what I think when I think of replacement theory, and I will say I'm learning in this conversation, right, is we really haven't determined the destination. So it's incredibly difficult, so we have the literature and the data that says, yes, it's going to flip and someone's going to become the majority and someone will be the minority, but we haven't really defined, right, as the people that might be emerging to be the majority. Well, what does that mean? If nothing infrastructure wise or no policy or anything is going to change, I'm not disagreeing with Dewan. So maybe there is fear there, but I mean, I think that we would also have to think, what will it matter, right? I mean, you'll have a larger space that you consume, but will that actually mean anything in terms of controlling, the environments that we've been functioning in?
Michael, can you bring a Jewish perspective to this, a white male Jewish perspective?
Well, Charlottesville and the full-throated yelling of Jews will not replace us is a consistent theme in Jewish history, whether it's the pogroms in Eastern Europe, whatever it is, it's been or the Inquisition, it's a consistent theme. And, you know, the idea that, that the Jews are in financial control of the world is something that's been out there for a long, long time. And it has a history to it. And the, you know, when I'm starting this conversation, I have to really be in tune with what I'm feeling, which is there's a lot of angry people out there, and a lot of those angry people have guns, and uh, they could get out of hand pretty easily. We've got, you know, I use Ukraine as an example. There was mass migration out of Ukraine, and they were taken in Eastern Europe pretty readily. They were, or in Europe pretty readily, if you know, in the United States, around the world. And how would that be different if they were not people of white skin? And so, you know, the idea of we're coming into a time where, you know, there are tremendous floods in Pakistan. The whole, you know, ton of that country is underwater. We are facing immigration. It is gonna happen. And the idea that this concept of replacement theory is in the mainstream, is being uh, you know, espoused on Fox TV. You know, I was listening to Tucker Carlson talking about, you know, we're allowing these people in, these immigrants in, and they're going to take our votes. That we're losing our power. They're taking our votes. You know, my feelings on this are really, you know, first of all, I, I I'm afraid it could get out of hand pretty easily. I'm overwhelmed because I think this is a pretty big issue that's not going away easy. You know, there's a lot of different feelings that I'm feeling about it, but um, if I don't start from that place, what I'm feeling about the concept for me personally, um, it's hard for me to know where my blind spots are to be in real conversation.
All right. And when we talk about blind spots, and I think I'm going to pick up on what was shared by Denise in regards to what will be this new pathway. There's a new pathway that's coming before us, whether we want it or not. By 2045, population shift is going to occur. And as Michael stated, we have immigration occurring on a daily basis from Ukraine and other places around the world where people are coming to our country, to America and across the world to seek refuge. I'm going to ask Rebecca, because you're a systems thinking person and you have a systems level framework. What are the systems that are influencing this, and how can we use systems to kind of like not only move into this public square where we can have this tough dialogue, but move towards where Dwan shared in regards to where people can feel safe to have this conversation, where we can move towards some place of reconciliation or healing, if that's possible.
Yeah, and thank you. I think as I'm listening to everyone speaking, for me, when I think about why this is such a difficult conversation, I come back to our shared history and the fact that it's been hidden from all of us for such a long time. And when we don't have an understanding of where we truly have come from, and all of this pushback that we're seeing about the 1619 Project, quote unquote, critical race theory, and now we're hearing about white replacement theory. For me, all of this comes back to the fact that there are many different narratives about this country, how it was founded, why it was founded, what the intentions of our quote unquote founding fathers were, and not understanding that race has always been a key factor in the founding of our country. Slavery is and was, still is, the underlying reason why America has the wealth that it has, why America has the power that it has, So until we are able to reconcile with those facts and understand where we truly have come from, which is why I love Dawn, I love your work. It's so critically important. And until we can have those conversations, and so for me, I believe that those conversations can happen and we create those safe spaces that Dawn is talking about by just inviting folks into this understanding, a deeper understanding, and also bringing into the conversation that all of us were born into these systems. None of us created the system. We may be upholding it. There may be people in our family who have upheld it, who were a part of it, but all of us right now, we're not a part of building it. So until we can take a step back and really understand how this system was built, why it was built, where the impetus came from, understanding the doctrine of discovery and how deep this issue is. Over 500 years, much longer than America has been a country, but the basis of it starting in 1444, when we had the first racist text, the first mention of race even being created. Until we get to that point, then these conversations, I think, will be very scary places because we're not grounded. We're not grounded in reality right now. So we're talking about things without grounding, without knowledge, without history. And I think we see and we know that as if we don't know our history, we're never going to be able to move forward because we're kind of floundering all over the place. So that's where I go to and where I think we can have a really big impact on these issues.
I'm going to challenge you and I'm going to ask you to just bring it in a little bit because I know you're familiar with Brofenbrenner's research around systems. And I'm going to ask you, based on your understanding of systems, because the question is about systems. What system can we take and attack? We have the micro, the macro, we have all of these different systems, but what system do you think we can attack? For us on this call and the people that are going to participate in this conversation, what can we take and build on that one space to make a change?
So when we think about systems, and I think about levels, I think about, we were talking about the public square. And I think for me, when I think about impact, I think kind of in three. I know you asked me for one and I'm sorry.
Hey, that's okay.
I think of this having, so it's really important to think about this in an intersectional way. I don't believe that we can solve this problem in silos. And I truly believe that that's what has hindered a lot of this work in the past, is thinking of things like, okay, I'm going to focus on education. I'm going to focus on housing. I'm going to focus on incarceration. All really radically important things to think about, but until we can address the underlying root, and to me, that's colonization. So what system do we work on? We work on decolonization of our minds and of this imperial system. So to do that, I believe we need to have policy. We need to have people and folks working on policies. Things don't have, all of this was created with words. It was created with laws. So until we have folks that are thinking very deeply about those laws and how we change them, we're not going to see much. Like there's so much forward progress and then rolling back. And it's like so much forward progress and then rolling back because the laws aren't there enshrined into law. So veto-proof laws. One of the campaigns that I worked on in a past life before moving to Detroit was on nuclear abolition. And the way that we were so successful was understanding how laws work. And we had to get a supermajority for our bill and our treaty to pass so that it was veto-proof. So understanding the different avenues and how we can have an impact. So A, policy. B, education. So like we were just saying, having these conversations, opening up spaces that are safe for folks to come and speak. And then the third piece, which is critically important, that we don't focus on is that public square space. So the outreach, the advocacy, the like huge social media campaigns, getting folks involved. A lot of my work revolved around nuclear weapons, and I'm thinking to 1980 or 1982, when there were over 1 million people in New York City marching against nuclear weapons, but it was the Black community who brought everyone together. And it was through outreach and through a huge groundswell. And that was done through the Black community. And so I know we have the resources to do it. It's just going to me, it's about coordinating those efforts again through intersectionality, policy, education, and then outreach.
Thank you for setting us up to get to Eric, because he's our policy guy. So Eric, when you think about this through your current role, working in the mayor's office and being the voice of Detroit, you have a strong background seriously, you have a strong background in moving people to the public square. What's your thoughts around first, let's get your general thoughts around replacement theory, because we had some background conversation around that, your general perspective around replacement theory, but also how do you see you leveraging your capital through the political framework to help advance some type of agenda where we can move towards systematizing change in Detroit around this issue?
So, policy guy. So I definitely don't claim to be a policy guy. I'm a storyteller and a marketing guy. And I try not to go into people's spaces like that. But I laughed a little bit when I talked about how funny I think the idea of white replacement theory is, because the numbers don't work out. And so in a truly non-creative fashion, right? I'm an artist, as you can see by all of this stuff. I'm gonna lean into the numbers here, right? Right now, our population is, and I wrote it down, right? 57.8% non-Hispanic white, 18.7% Hispanic, 12.44% Black, and 6% Asian. If 50% of that population, of the white population, is men, that is 28.9% white men. White men. We'll take the woman out of the play. White men. All right. So that's already more than the entirety of all the other races. Then, if you said 50% of them were conservative, we'll keep it conservative and say only 50% of white men are conservative. That takes me down to 14.45% of the US population. All right. So 14.45% of the US population is conservative white men. That's it. That's still more than all the Black people together. And then you'd have to add some Asian people on top. All right. So so like the replacement part, it's a weird statement. And then if you really want to talk about power, because somebody mentioned power earlier, right? Like the real concern is the shift of power. 62% of office holders are white men, right? Like 62%. They are 8.9% of the US population and 62% of the office holders. So even without the numbers, even though they still have the numbers, they still greatly outnumber all of us in power. So let's do that. Let's look at the fact that if all the white conservative men voted for one person, they would outnumber all of the Black people mobilized. And here's the thing, we're not a monolith either. So all of the Black folks are not voting the same way. But if all the conservative white men alone did it, and if you add the 50% of white women that are conservative, they could swallow up all of us. All right. So let's start there. That's why when people say white replacement theory, I giggle a little bit. Part two, right? In 2050 or 2045, when the population numbers shift, right? What you're saying is that there will be 49% white people and 51% everybody else.
Right.
We are not together. People and Asian people and Hispanic people are not a blob. We are not the same voting block. That's a weird thing to say. Black people are not together, right? We are not a voting block, right? Jewish people are not a voting block, right? To pretend as though when white people slip under the 1%, that it is white people versus everybody. That is a dramatic overestimation of the unity of the minorities versus the white folks. So so first we'll have like a numbers conversation. Then I want to talk to Dewan's empathy point, right? The why should we care part. When I see people marching with tiki torches saying that people will not replace us, or you hear people saying that they're worried, I think there's two things going on that I think us on the liberal side need to really come to grips with. And on the flip side, we need to really think about what we are saying, right? So part one, I think the posts are doing that. Have you ever heard the phrase, it ain't no fun when the rabbits got the gun? I think people gave up the game. The idea that if there is a majority, they will discriminate against the minority. They say all the time, if we're in charge, why do you think we would treat you badly? Well, we don't want anybody else in charge because they might treat someone badly. Feels like projection to me. That's just me. On the liberal side, I do think sometimes we're being disingenuous when we say we're not trying to replace any seats at the table. We're just trying to add seats to the table. Okay, well, let's look at the composition of an executive leadership team. We've got a CEO and a COO and a CCO and all these other groups, and then we have a chief diversity officer, okay? How many CEOs do you get, right? How many CEOs are we adding? Co-CEOs, 3 or 4 CEOs? That's not really how the leadership structure of organizations work. We are saying, to some degree, we would like to see other people in leadership. And the last part of that empathy that we really need to have is, even if somebody were to say, listen, okay, I get it. I've been here for some years. I'm 52 years old. I think it's time for me to step out the way. They still want their kids to have opportunities to rise as well. White people have white kids, right? And so we're not just saying we want you to move. We're saying we want your lineage to move. And so we are not being considerate of the fact that people aren't stupid. And sometimes I think we're saying things that feel good and sound good, but we're not thinking about the ripple effect of that either. And so that's why I like to go back to those numbers. What does this actually mean in the context of the leadership? 62% of office holders are white men. We're not making more seats, right? If we bring that down to 50%, some of y'all got to get up and go. And that is what they're hearing when they say replacement theory. But the power, the numbers are not stacking up. Even if we get to 50, there's still a capital consideration. There's a power consideration. There's an entrenched systemic engagement, systemic power factor that happens that you're not going to see really shift for 100, 200 years or until America changes into something else. Because the foundation of the place is built to celebrate and lift up certain folks. And so I think we need to get to that part of the conversation. Right? We just are not talking about numbers. We're talking more about how the transition feels. And I think that's different, right? So that's my weigh in on white replacement theory and just how I hear it and how I've been hearing it for years, which I've always thought was weird.
But Eric, that's logical to you and to us on this call, but that's not logical to other people that are on the other side of the coin who are seeing my positionality, or going back to the Constitution, my posterity, which is what you said, my future generations will not be able to benefit from all of the atrocities that have been placed on other people who have been subjugated to a position of less than for over 400 plus years. So we're not going to remedy that issue in America, because if we remedy that issue in America, that means that, as you stated, we have to give up something in order for people to come to the table and participate. Perception is reality. So going back to my question around policy, because even though you're a storyteller, you work for the city, and telling stories help inform how policies are directed. Telling stories help inform how policies are implemented. So while you're not a quote unquote policy maker, you influence policy through your voice.
Sometimes.
Good point.
I want to bring you back to your creative nature, and I want to also capitalize on what was brought out in regards to education, public square, and policy by Rebecca. So if we were to look at education, the public square, and policy, how would you frame, or would you use that as a way in which we can move towards addressing issues around bringing harmony to this tough conversation?
So I had a conversation with a really good friend of mine who happens to be a white guy who has business in the city. And he was talking about how the insurance rates were making it really hard for him to do business and all these sorts of things. And we landed on this term that was really funny called racism by proximity, which is the idea that because people can't target you by your race anymore on paper, they do geographic racial targeting, right? There are a lot of Black people in Detroit. It is an easy target. Anything that is wrong with Black people in America is happening to people in Detroit because Detroit has the highest population by percentage of Black people in a metropolitan area, right? So they were like, listen, if you had to take systemic racism and congeal it into the shape of a city, it's this place, right? So what you see is people saying, why should we care about Detroit? You go to the Mackinac Policy Conference, you go to these big business conferences, and you hear them say, why should we care more about Detroit than these other places? Here's the thing. If Detroit is an economic driver, but it's experiencing all the things that would come with racism, the only way for you to make your money is to dismantle the systems of racism impacting that place. The only way to do that is to then say that this city and the people therein have enough value for us to consider, which would then allow you to have the access and opportunities that you would have in other places, but in a metropolitan area. And so one of the things that I try to do is bring back the beauty and the joy and the understanding that there are people here, not resilient people, but incredible people who are doing incredible things. This narrative of like gritty, struggling, crawling through the mud type of folks, like Detroiters wear furs, bro. Like we're having a good time. We just are experiencing some systemic friction. So if I can remind people that the people and the talent and those folks have value, the investment in the area can come back. It's why when you look online, you see the Gucci store open, you see comments like, oh, well, that place is going to get robbed. Excuse me. People get robbed everywhere. Have we not had the conversation of the fact that Detroiters wear Gucci generally, and maybe that store will do really well because we like labels here? No, because that's not the prevailing theme. The idea is racially motivated, which is the idea that those people don't understand value, therefore they will take and destroy what they don't understand. It's fundamentally false. And so my job, I think, is to return the dignity to the residents and the people and the place philosophically from the people who are here and external. Right? That is my goal. And I really don't care about external, but I really do care that the people internally can radiate. And so when you do that work, in the same way the Black community has always done, when you do great things, people come to see it. So that is the goal. That's my creative outlook on how I can drive not only policy, but how do you get people in, like you said, the supermajority, how do you get people who are not in your city to invest in your city by showing off the fact that those folks are worth investing in? And the reason why they don't think that is primarily and almost always, whether they admit it or not, racially motivated. So, yeah.
All right, that's cool.
I'd love
So
to
Truman,
You set this
can,
up real good for
we're all like,
Denise.
Yeah,
You set
exactly.
this up real good for Denise because you come in it from a healthcare perspective. I mean, you're at the table in a seat that you pretty much broke a glass ceiling. And how do you see this playing out as a senior VP and CEO for Henry Ford Health System in your role as a Black woman? How do you see replacement theory playing out? But also, I'm gonna challenge you to your statement around what the newness is going to look like. What can we do new based on your role? How can we leverage your role to advance this dialogue?
Absolutely. And actually, Eric's comments made me think, right, when he talked about having chief diversity officers, where those conversations, are being had. I think the system that you discussed and what Rebecca said is what I try to do, educate, right? So I say you're not trying to infuse, diversity or replace, unfortunately, if that's the perspective, for the sake of that, right? In our world, it's really around we treat people that are of diverse backgrounds. So we believe that having representation in the people that provide that treatment not just in leadership. So the glass ceiling I broke may be, good from a leadership perspective, but we think it matters with nurses, with physicians, with pharmacists, right? That they should represent the communities that they're serving. So part of it really is creating context. So it's actually what we've been talking about for this section is trying to take this small little world we have of 33,000 employees and declaring, which we have done, that diversity, equity, inclusion, and we added justice to our agenda in Henry Ford Health matters. And why? Because we provide a critical, service to the community, and we have to do it in a way that's holistic, that realizes that we're serving and treating people, not just from a race perspective, of course, but definitely socioeconomic, geographic, language, religion, all of those things, come into play when you're talking about being healthy. And so we use it, as a lightning rod of conversation and creating hopefully community of discovery. And if we do that within our organization, we know then that's 33,000 people perhaps that began to get touched, by a little bit more education, a little bit more understanding, trying to break down, some of those walls. And so we're, on that journey. But I would say that's absolutely how I try to use my role, and really our organization, I think, tries to use the position that we have. And we're unique, right? We're one of only a few health systems that really remain in the city of Detroit. It's where our headquarters are. We're a local, organization. So we have a huge voice, in that, and we don't shy away from what it means to be a part of that journey.
Thank you. And that's a good lead in for Dewan, because he doesn't shy away either from these difficult conversations, but even in the work that he's engaged in and trying to get people to invest in majority Black businesses. So we know, going all the way back to Booker T. Washington, with the Booker T. Washington Association, we've been attempting to get more investment in Black run businesses, but that's a difficult journey when there's this deficit narrative that's associated with Blacks, i.e. replacing white businesses in certain spaces, especially when you get into the space where you're using quote unquote minority set-asides. So how do you navigate this work in getting people to invest and still have the same conversations that we're talking about in regards to this replacement theory?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I believe that we're all misunderstood, right? I think that when we talk about the guy from Buffalo, right, he doesn't represent everybody from his town. He don't represent everybody from his block. There's a lot of people on his block that probably feel differently, right? There's some things that, yeah. So what we do at Black Leaders Detroit is try to tap into that, right? Like, we're not trying to win somebody over that is coming from a position of hatred and overwhelmed with fear. Where are those people that are in the middle, that are optimistic, that may disagree with me on some things politically and some other things, but they still are about fairness, right? Like they identify with somebody that wants to be open-minded and open to fairness. And I think for us, right, especially people of color, we sit in, I think I want to talk about a little bit about the intersection of power, which we heard use, education, and public space, right? We sit in a position of power as it relates to this subject matter, right? And that's scary to white folk, right? And to have to concede or come to us for the education, because no matter what, we all understand it at some level, right? Even if we're not well studied, we have lived experience, right? Which forces education on this subject matter upon us. So when we look at 2020, when it was obvious that this was only sharing importance with the pandemic, right? And COVID-19 was okay, we have 1 and 2, right? After George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the young folk that were out there holding a mirror up to us as a nation, that applied pressure. And now we have, a fight against critical race theory and all these other things, because what's happening is they have to concede and say, wait a minute, are we getting ready to allow folk to teach our children when we've been able to walk around without having a high level of understanding? And I think there's a combination, and I always try to figure out what role do I play, right? So I'll talk to us a little bit, and we have to figure out how to become like good teachers, right? Like nobody really wants the teacher that's going to chastise you and embarrass you for what you don't know, right? Like people want an educator that's going to gently hold you on your back, right? And like explain to you and walk you through. And sometimes the temptation to put white folk in check or call them out on some BS or their ignorance, that temptation is too much for us to handle. We can't resist it because we don't find ourselves in that position, right? But we do remember those nights when we went home and saying, damn, I wish I would have said this to that person when they treated me this way or when they said this, right? So we're walking around with that. So we're in position of educator as opposed to like taking a posture of a teacher that somebody would want to learn from. We're like, okay, I'm going to become this strict disciplinarian that's going to pound it over your head. And I think that's one of the things that we have to try to figure out, because we do hold the power. We do hold the wealth when it comes to the conversation or the experience and understanding on race, which is coming back up time and time again. We can't escape it.
But I'm going to bring you back central to my question, Dwan.
Go ahead.
How do you, in your role, navigate this space to get white people, white men in general, who are investing in Black businesses to believe that their businesses are no longer going to be needed if you invest heavily in Black businesses that can potentially become a juggernaut per se, if they do well?
How do we get them to believe that their business is no longer going to be needed?
Or how do you get them to believe that if their businesses become obsolete because of the investment based on the replacement theory, you invest, my business becomes obsolete? Yeah. Going back to what Eric stated, there's this vicious psychology that's out there that if I give up something, I have to, and you've used the term concession consistently in this conversation. So somebody has to concede something. So if I make a fiscal investment, I'm conceding something in order to get something in return, potentially. There has to be some type of public benefit or mutual benefit. And if I don't feel a benefit, I'm not going to invest. For the people that may not get benefit, how do you navigate those spaces?
That is it, right? So like, I don't look to convince people of that. Like that's might be too big a lift even for me, right? Where I land on and what I look for is somebody that believes in fairness, that believes in equity, right? Like that term is thrown around, and it's like, it's rough because we don't have an agreed upon definition for it, but everybody has it as a core value or like something that they say they believe in. So that's what we look for. And we've created a mechanism where we can kind of call you out on it, right? Like we saw billion-dollar announcements from all of everybody in the banking industry, like, right? When we were walking around in shock and hurting after like watching George Floyd be murdered. And what we've done, we say, okay, well, if you're making these announcements, here's a space where we can invest and we can see if you're really about that, right? I like to believe on my good days that though we have systems that have intentionally kept us on the outside looking in, there are also like different leadership in some of those structures and some of those spaces, right? Like, i.e. Denise Brooks Williams, right? So as we have different leadership there, we also were like, especially when we're talking about our white colleagues, white men in particular, they were brought up in those systems. So even if they have a desire to do something different, they don't necessarily know how, right? So we sit in the position where we say, okay, we realize that you want to be different, you want to do something different. We'll teach you how, we'll show you how. You can do that by investing in an organization like Black Leaders Detroit, giving up the seat of, okay, like I have to call the shots, right? Because you can't say that I know how and let me lead everybody at the same time, right? So we try to help them with that and at the same time get them to come up off some money to support the Black entrepreneurs that are doing some amazing work in the city of Detroit.
All right. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up, everybody. This has been a great conversation. I know we didn't come up with a solution in an hour, but we did come up with, I think, some gemstones that can potentially help us move forward in having these difficult conversations. And having these difficult conversations, I believe, is going to require more of what we've shared on this call. and being able to be honest and open and providing safe spaces for people to talk. And to build on what was shared, that public space requires a lot of education. A lot of us, US, have been miseducated. Us have been miseducated around race and race relations in America and humanness and what it means to be human in this experience. With that said, I'm going to ask everyone to close out with what brings you hope? What brings you hope? And we'll start with our friend Michael. Can't hear you, Michael.
What brings me hope? So, I think that it is clear from the conversation that there's a lot of different threads that are being pulled here. Eric and Dwan had, some really important things to say. And some of those are, and I think Eric used the phrase dignity. I think somehow we have to find that place of dignity. And whether that's, and I think we all have a lot of work to do to find that place of dignity. We have to be a lot more humble and real about the things that are going on inside of us, the feelings we have inside of us, so that we can actually engage in the conversation. And I'm hopeful that there is a tremendous amount more knowledge and available resources that enable us to deal with the feelings of not enough, the shame that comes with not being enough, all of these triggers that we have that keep us outside of being able to see who we are. So that's what gives me hope, that there's a Dr. Sean Ginwright who wrote a book, 4 Pivots, that says the first thing that we need to do is look in the mirror. And if we're not doing our own work, we can't help anybody else do theirs. So that's what gives me hope.
Thank you, my friend. And my friend Denise, what brings you hope, my friend?
Yeah, I think I would echo some of what our conversation has been. First, I'm hopeful because we're talking about it and we're trying to find ways to convene the conversation. I think, Truman, I would end with your comment to just say it is a us, right? There are perhaps no innocent people, in the place that we are, because we all have the opportunity to learn, to convene, to say the things, that are on our heart and our mind sometimes when we're in places where we could be educators. So I think it'll be a lot of little and big things, right? But I'm hopeful because I believe you have conveners like New Detroit, and for those that'll come into this conversation, and I think hopefully pick up the baton from this panel. So,
thank you, thank you, thank you, Eric. What brings you hope?
Hope? No, I'm kidding. Well, what brings me hope? This is gonna be messed up. One of my favorite things in life is watching like Gen Z white kids on TikTok, like educate their parents about systemic inequity in America, about race, gender, inequalities, sexuality, all that kind of stuff. There is such a proliferation of negative media in silos, but there's also an incredible proliferation of understanding that's happening in the young folks. I mean, when you watch the March for Our Lives kids not only take digital platforms over and then outclass the NRA on Twitter, but also then take to the streets and then go on CNN with talking points. And they think they just elected their first person from the March for Our Lives a movement into a political seat of power. I think it's 24, 25 years old. I mean, the kids are all right. Like the kids are really taking a reign of what it means to take political action as well as digital action. Gen Z is my favorite. Gen Alpha seems to be on the same path. Like I said, there are some horrible, Andrew Tates and these sorts of people online spouting nonsense. But I do think watching how courageous the kids have been. There are many of us who wouldn't have argued with their parents at the dinner table about why they shouldn't say that about the Black kid at school. And to see a 14-year-old, pick up that fight, or I think that's Gen Alpha, pick up that fight and then post it online, or even see what Kellyanne Conway's daughter fight with her mother in a public space about inclusion and understanding. These kids are some of the bravest. This is one of the bravest generation of kids I've ever seen. And that gives me a lot of hope. I'm really excited about it.
Thank you, Eric. And Dewan, what brings you hope?
I guess just hearing like us here and seeing people so committed to do whatever is in our ability and our power, right? I hear like Michael say that like he's scared, right? But he's here, he's showing up, right? And I hear that he's talking about 33,000, like that's, a small city, right? And if we're committed to doing the work, and I know that you can't make sure that 33,000 is in the place where we all need to be, but if we remember that it's a mirror there, right, versus all the windows, and we're going to like lead by example and do the work. And I'm just crazy and gullible enough to believe that we'll move the needle, and as Mike Rafferty always says, pass the next generation something better that they can build upon. Right?
Thank you. And then Rebecca, what brings you hope, my friend?
Yes. I think what we all mentioned certainly is what brings me hope. I was nodding along as Eric was speaking because it's having the privilege to work with so many young people and be in communication with them often, and just seeing, Eric, as you were saying, how they are holding folks' feet to the fire and in such creative ways. It brings me joy. So maybe that's what brings me joy. And I think for me, when I see a movement that's able to bring joy into it, I think that's when we find the most success. And so that brings me so much hope. The fact that we're able to have this conversation, Eric, the fact that you found it funny, you're able to laugh about this, like that's so critically important to me, because that says that there is hope. There is a reason for us to continue to have these conversations. And the fact that we were able to kind of bring this together in a pretty quick manner once we finally all got in communication with each other, but just the fact that we're here, we're having this conversation, and it feels like something that can continue. It was difficult and it was scary, but we got through it, and we learned. Like I learned things today. So yeah, this being here in this moment with all of you brings me so much hope.
Well, thank you all for participating in this community and in this community conversation. And I want to just lift up again what Eric stated. Eric, you're being quoted a lot today. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are the things that bring me hope, because I have children in both of those generations, and I see change. And as we continue to come to the public square, thank you, New Detroit, for providing us with this opportunity, and thank you, Fifth Third Bank, for investing in this dialogue. And I'm going to yield the floor to our colleague, Marshall Montgomery Favors, who will give us up what's next.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you all for engaging in this conversation. Dr. Truman Hudson Jr. for leading us, Michael Sosin, Dwan Dandridge, Eric Thomas, and Rebecca Irby and Denise Brooks Williams. I just wanted to let everyone know that this is a pre-conference event for New Detroit's Just Lead Advancing Racial Equity Conference. We want to continue to engage people in our region around these conversations around racial equity. It's the region's first conference devoted solely to racial equity that brings together a cross-section of leadership and viewpoints. And we have an exceptional lineup of speakers. You're going to experience things like an open plenary with Dr. Abdul El Sayed and Jeffrey Robinson, facilitated by Rebecca Irby, who's joining us here today. We have a lunch times fireside chat between Dr. Ibram X. Kendi and Christy McDonald, and just so much more. But you can find out more details about the conference by visiting newdetroit.org. You can order tickets and get a sneak peek of our Jest Institute. Thank you all for joining us, and sign up for our mailing list to find out more information about upcoming town halls like this and more information about New Detroit's events. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.